Avowed, hopefully the action RPG that we deserve.
Salutations, everybody. It is Maddie here today. I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. I know I am. I'm no longer in LA, and I played Avowed, so I'm winning on both ends. I kid.
Surviving LA, what a time to be alive.
My friends from LA, I love you dearly. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about some time I spent with Avowed. I also had the opportunity to sit down alongside my lovely co-host of Defining Duke, Lord Cognito, on the Iron Lords podcast channel and talk to the production director and art director of Avowed about what we played, and we got some answers. One of them kind of went like semi-viral about frame rate. Yeah, we'll talk about that here in this
Semi-viral? That's only 150k views. That's not really that viral on Twitter, but pretty good.
Video, but we're also going to get into a lot of nuggets that no one else is picking up from that interview because everyone is busy talking about frame rate, and these are like legitimately great answers beyond that. Certainly I have my thoughts on the frame rate conversation, we'll get into that, but I really wanted to lean into what I played from Avowed and what I learned from that interview. So we'll be spotlighting.
This doesn't look bad at all. But yeah, the UI is what the hell is even going on here. Super small mini-map, quest objectives here, not here, and, well, the character screen right there. The character screen is okay, it's your typical Dark Souls-esque type of thing.
Both of those today, and just a quick shout out that full interview, which is over a half hour long, will be linked in the description down below if you want to go ahead and check it out. So there's much to be said about Avowed. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here, consider subscribing. A little bit of housekeeping to warm us up here. First and foremost, Xbox did fly me out to this event in LA, and they did pay for my stay. I brought my fiance with me, so I paid for her flight. So some of my money was on the line, but I'm not like IGN or something like that where I got money coming out my ears and I can pay for every single trip. I'm trying to fund a game. I'm also trying to fund a wedding right now. So my money's going in a number of places.
Oh god, women who demand big weddings. That's a red flag.
I try to pay when I can, but just to be upfront and transparent, Xbox did pay for my part of getting there, and it did make this video possible. Now, with that in mind, I do want to open with my thoughts generally.
Okay, listen, there's a simple translation to this. Xbox didn't pay me money directly, but as Star Wars Outlaws, I was still lathered up and ready to serve. That's pretty much how it goes.
Speaking on Avowed in the event itself, I played a number of games there, and we'll talk about the rest of those in a separate video, but Avowed came in at my number 2 favorite game of the event, with Towerborn really being my personal favorite. I think Towerborn just showed out. It is
this looks good. Okay, jeez.
Remarkable to play. It pulls from some of my favorite beat 'em ups growing up, whether it be something as old as Turtles in Time or something as new as Dragon's Crown. And I think they're just doing all the right things. And I would never doubt Stoic as the developers of the Banner Saga, but they really just impressed me. And they gave me a level of transparency.
I would doubt absolutely any company, because if a company releases one good game, that does not mean I'm licking their boots until the end of time, okay?
In my conversation with them, which is something I'll talk about in a later video. So
there's a reason the term one-hit wonders exist. Typically it's a music thing, but still.
So it really just won me over. Whereas Avowed, I think, is really good, but it does have a couple of problems to it that I don't know if they're going to get ironed out by launch, even with this delay in mind. So let's talk about that. For me, it really comes down to the combat. When it comes to the design and the mechanics, this is some of the best Obsidian has ever done. I was flipping between loadouts, I was popping abilities and skills, sometimes combining them between myself and my companion Kai to do some cool things. I was also using them for exploration. There's a lot of fluidity and flexibility in this combat system, and when you look at it alongside
all of that looked good.
Their last combat system in the Outer Worlds, it's night and day. It's not even close. Whereas Outer Worlds,
well, yeah, obviously this does not look good.
Shooting existed as a conduit to get to the best part of the game, which was dialogue and skill checking. Avowed still has a lot of dialogue. We'll see how the skill checking pans out. But man, does the combat really show out in a strong way on a...
Okay, now this still looks kind of... Well, it doesn't look horrible, technically now. Oh, but yeah, dual one spamming, boo, 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 boo. Definitely by far looked, since the beginning of Avowed, the weakest part of the game by a landslide. Now it at least looks a little bit meatier, but the animation is still not there. Oh, Yeah, the combat animations is the thing that I said that they need to improve the most. Everything else kind of looks fine. Don't sniff that woke sauce, don't sniff that anything bad currently, kind of. Well, admittedly, we still don't know everything, but again, I'm still high in expectations for Avowed.
Mechanics level, and then because of that, the level design is the best it's ever been for Obsidian. It also helps
The crits suck though. Oof.
that this game looks way better than I
But you can probably turn off damage numbers in general, so it's fine.
ever expected it to look. You know, in the trailers, I think you saw that this was a vibrant world, but when I had it running in front of me, I was just so impressed by how great the lighting was and how the color grading was, the way that they created these environments beyond the assets that existed within them, like the statues, but the debris that lay around it. Like, this is a beautiful game, which I didn't quite anticipate because it's Obsidian, and that's not really ever their focus. But what I'm happy to say is it doesn't feel like it detracted from what I think they do well. For example,
I think it looks good, and more importantly, I think the world makes sense. I talked about this. When you look at something like Avatar's Frontier of Pandora, it's a shitfest, okay? You have the same type of tree and fungus and flower growing in the marshes, the mountains, the riverlands, the everywhere, okay? Well, there's technically no riverlands because it's all just a stupid dense jungle, but it doesn't make sense, okay? But when you look at Avowed, stuff makes sense. Biomes are different. And I like that. I like that realism, okay?
I had a conversation with this gentleman that me and Cog are currently calling the Gold and Silver Surfer until we can remember his name properly. And this man, who is a godlike just like me, talked forever. And in a good way, I mean. I had like 7, 8 dialogue options at one point, and I would go down a whole entire rabbit hole. And normally dialogue systems go like this. They narrow over time, and so all those options kind of exist as an illusion to get you to the same endpoint. So as I'm clicking through dialogue, making all these different choices, I think I'm just narrowing things down. But then all of a sudden I get kicked back to the top, and there are those 7 or 8 options again. And I'm blown away. I'm like, wow, so it looks this good. The gameplay is shaping up pretty well, and the dialogue is meaty. So it doesn't feel like any of this was done at the sacrifice of what I know and love about Obsidian, which made me really happy with the game.
Did his skin texture pop up at the start of the frame? That's kind of messed up.
But I opened this up with like a criticism. That's because I lay that all out to make sure that you're aware that something is here and something is good about it, but it doesn't feel quite great in the melee area versus the ranged area where it does feel better. And I will also say this.
I don't know about that. Those 3 melee swings looked pretty good.
Sound is not good when it comes to combat. It needs to be better. Now, while the FPS conversation is out there, frame rate did not play a factor in my experience because I was playing it on a PC and it was running at 60 frames per second. I did not play this on an Xbox console. So with that in mind, what goes wrong with this? I went through the demo twice over. The first time as a ranger, so I had 2 guns in my hands, I had a bow and arrow in my hand that I could switch to, so I was doing some stealth takedowns. When enemies were coming at me, I had abilities to throw out. I could use both guns, I could charge up shots. That felt good. Avowed felt at home right then and there. Then I switched over to the barbarian class. This, I don't know how to word it, did not feel good. It didn't. The way animations rattled off felt janky. The visual feedback for when you were cleaving through
Doesn't look bad. What the hell?
enemies, VFX aside, like you had directional bleeding and stuff like that was there where it was giving you proper visual response to what you were doing, but
That was awkward, but again,
it was even more floaty.
melee definitely seemed the weakest part, by the way, but because there was not enough responsiveness when enemies take damage. But this kind of looks okay. Am I taking crazy pills, boys? Does this honestly look bad to you, or is Matty as always on absolute crazy pills?
It felt like in Skyrim at times, and I don't like to say that because again, mechanically it's sound. The encounter designs are great. There was one room where they threw like 10 skeletons at me and I'm dodging around, switching weapons. It's very engaging, but when you get to the melee side of things, like I will probably be avoiding that style of play for as long as I can in Avowed, and I would just suggest
That did not look that bad.
if you're looking for the best experience here, Mage, Ranger. They feel the most at home. They feel the best. They look right. They definitely embrace the majority of the game's mechanics.
Okay, now it looks a little bit better when there's actually, cycle wanding, not pa 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 pa. You can't even abracadabra the lunch lady. That's pathetic.
but Melee does not feel great in this game. And when you combine that with what was said in the interview, I'll let you listen for the answer yourself here.
I mean, nitty gritty of it, performance is one of the last things we figure out, right? We are core, and I think we've announced this elsewhere, we are core targeting 30 frames per second bare minimum. Like that's the expectation. It's a first person single player game. You don't necessarily need that 60 frames, and that allows us to get a lot.
You want those 60 frames. It's not about needing, it's about being, 60 frames per second. How is gaming struggling with 60 frames per second for decades now, okay? How are we not there?
Juicier with VFX and lighting and all this other stuff. So it's a trade-off we opted to make relatively early, and we're really happy with that. I mean, the game's running pretty smooth for how, visually dense it is. And that was always our goal.
Literally could not care less. Make it better. Make it look better. Make it run smoother. I don't care if you're doing a trade-off. No one asked, okay? You're the developer. Do the developer things, okay?
But as far as like a greater understanding of performance spec, we're still figuring all that out. It's one of the last things you do. So, yeah.
I don't think it's really acceptable to be at 30 frames when your game looks great, but it doesn't look like, say, Hellblade levels, where I think we were willing to accept photorealism.
Admittedly, as long as it's a good game, who cares about the frame rate? Listen, Dragon's Dogma 2, when it launched, was unplayable in cities. Guess what? People literally could not care less. Why? Because frame rate is secondary, okay? Call of Duty peasants are gonna complain about frame rate even though it literally doesn't impact their game properly because the whole game's just garbage. That's a different story, okay? If it's a good game, people will play it. 40, 50, 30, whatever frame rates, as long as it's not choppy or bad like that, people are gonna like it. I don't even understand what's the point of this conversation. Again, Dragon's Dogma, as poorly optimized as your typical slave trade in Africa, still sold like hotcakes and people loved it. No one cared. Microtransactions up the wazoo because typical Capcom BS. No one cared at the end.
At 30 FPS. And I also think when your animations are looking like this, you gotta be at 60 frames on console. Like, there's just no excuse as far.
Okay, listen, no one cares about console. You can have your 5 frames on console. All the real gamers are on PC. Deal with it.
As far as I'm concerned, it just doesn't seem right to me, because this game is pushing Obsidian's limits, but it's viewed in a similar way I view Bethesda Game Studios. There's Bethesda Game Studios standards, there's industry standards, there's Obsidian standards, and then there's industry standards. And I think
okay, that's literally just making excuses for Bethesda being shit tier trash.
Obsidian finds themselves more in the middle of the pack of the games industry because they find themselves making a bunch of different games, from like Fallout New Vegas to Grounded to now Avowed and The Outer Worlds. Like, they're all kind of different.
By the way, I hate when people do this slow type of walk thing, because that just makes the game look boring, not makes me appreciate how it looks. And it looks good, by the way. Look at that. I like it. But man, when someone just does this slow move through a place, I'm like, oh my god, where's my trusty knife? I need it in my arteries. I don't like it. I hate it.
Different style games for the most part, whereas something like Avowed, which is now an exclusive game, and the fact that it's only at 30 and it has some visual jank like this in the animation department, I don't find particularly acceptable. And I hope that, because they said in the interview answer that this is one of the last things they do, that they do find a way to do 60 frames on console, at least the Series X. I can understand the Series S. We're seeing a bit of lagging behind on that, where Starfield, for example, just got 60 frames on Series S. So it's possible. It just takes more development time. I'm hoping that Avowed can get at least 60 frames on Series X at launch time, because I don't think it's acceptable. And if it didn't feel great to me,
yeah, I definitely want to turn off the damage numbers 100%. This is just not it, Chief.
60 frames, I don't think it's going to feel great when it comes to Melee at 30 frames. That was the main drawback for me. The other was the sound. So sound effects in Avowed feel like thuddy-duddy. They don't feel like visceral, and that can make all the difference. I've talked about it in my Indiana Jones preview, where the punches I said sound like gunshots. When you land them and you knock someone out, it's like half the battle, because the animations look clean enough, but it's when you're finishing them off and that sound effect kicks in, it elevates it to a whole other level. Sound is the most...
That didn't sound bad, the explosion. I wonder if you could hear that.
Underrated component of any game success story. It elevates the most emotional moments, it makes the most hype moments even better, and when you're trying to do some real damage, it's what really packs the punch the most compared to the animation that's on screen. So when Avowed is missing these sorts of things, I think something like the sound, which they did confirm in the interview, can be fine-tuned by launch time. They said that's one of the last things they do, so this criticism may not factor in.
You know, want to hear a secret? I typically play with the sound off because I'm usually listening to a podcast or something like that on the other monitor. That one right there, where I'm looking at the moment. So I typically don't play with the sound on because typically sound is not that important in the gameplay figuring out stuff department. So, you know, it's a trade-off.
Into the final build, but I will say right now, it should be a priority because it doesn't sound great and in turn it doesn't feel great. I think I could deal with floaty animations if the sound effects, especially in melee combat, were better. So fingers crossed on that. But overall, when I'm looking at the complete package here, the combat does enough to get the job done. In particular with ranged and mage combat, these do.
I don't know, this doesn't seem bad to me at all. This completely doesn't seem that bad to me at all.
Feel pretty good. But if you're like a Bethesda Game Studios fan, such as myself, there's a trade-off here that may make things a little more appealing to you. I say that because one thing that really disappointed me with Starfield, as I've said a million times, so I
One thing? How about everything?
apologize if I'm a broken record to you, is the lack of truly unique looking and feeling weapons in that game. Like, to me, that's a Bethesda Game Studios and now Obsidian Entertainment staple. And so I was very pleased.
What? Unique looking weapons are a Bethesda staple? I'm sorry, have you played Fallout 3, 2, 1, 4, New Vegas? None of them have unique looking weapons, okay? Some weapons just have written on them, unique, and that's pretty much it. None of those weapons in particular feel that unique, honestly. Like, what the hell?
To learn in my demo that they had a plethora of unique weapons to run through, some with their own different active abilities, some with their own different passives, but more importantly, they all looked different. And they did confirm in said interview that I did that there were a lot of uniques. So that made me excited because I'm happy to see more.
The blood splatters could use a little bit of work, I guess, but it's not bad.
Loot, more changes in my loadout. That goes a really long way with me compared to maybe others out there. Perhaps the biggest surprise of my time with Avowed was the level design. The level design in this game opens things up a lot, especially because that impacts quest design if Obsidian's on their A game. And right now, I'm getting a pretty good feeling about things. Now, I did play from a save file that was about 6 levels in. So I was early enough in the game, but not super deep into the thick of things where I was seeing all the reactivity. But for example, there were already multiple options I presented to you on how I could go through combat. Then the level itself opens up where there's different stealth routes. There's certain like hidden caverns that I could drop into, multiple entrances into rooms. Almost, not quite though, Dishonored-like. It kind of reminded me of
The spazzing graphics on the debris, a classic.
that though when I dropped into one of my quest objectives and there was like a couple other ways in, I went, okay, Obsidian, like I can get behind this style level design. But where it most surprised me was in the unmarked quest objectives. So there was this giant statue that Gold and Silver Surfer was building. And it turns out that I didn't know, and I say this as someone who, by the way, loves Obsidian games and tries
Didn't know what? You can probably fight it?
to study in like a science, that I was typically going to check for those sorts of things. And I found out because a demo has told me, by the way, if you mess with these switches attached to this statue, something might happen, that I completely bypassed a whole step of the quest and pissed off Gold and Silver Surfer. And this man came after him and we fought. And I thought it was amazing to see that was there and it was totally missable. And even in the interview, they talked about how you could bypass whole combat situations and the game's going to account for that just by ability.
Yeah, and that was one of the best things about the game in my perspective. The idea that you can just do things out of order because you come across in the game takes account for that. I think that's great. That's one of my favorite game designs in open world games. You go in that direction, F around a little bit, do something, go in that direction, and someone's like, could you please save my family? And you're like, from the raiders in that direction? Well, I just killed them all. And then they're like, "Oh, did you save my family? Oh, oh, I cannibalized them. Well, whoopsie doopsie. I guess they were already dead." You know, stuff like that. Real great.
Abilities that, say, a ranger may have. So I could see the level of reactivity and player options here really winning people over, where things like the combat may disrupt people's level of hype, but I think it could be balanced out a little bit more if these sorts of things win you over. For me, it kind of evened me out a bit, where I had a lot to be excited about, but a lot to maybe, I wouldn't say be concerned about, but definitely I think could use some improvement, but won't make or break the experience, but I think is holding it back from like true greatness. I also learned during my interview that I also learned during the interview with Cog that there were actually 50 plus ending slides in this game. That was something I was surprised wasn't scooped up by outlets.
Cool. Good. That's really great. It's gonna be like New Vegas. You do a bunch of stuff and everyone tells you what you did. Nice. My first playthrough of Fallout New Vegas. Man, I ruined that place. Jesus, I left it in a worse state than it started out. It happens.
It's like there were some significant answers we got there beyond the frame rate that I think needed some real attention, because 50 plus ending slides is a huge deal. For those of you who are like me and big fans of things like Fallout 3 and New Vegas, like even the Outer Worlds, like these are things ripped straight out of those games. So to know there's over 50 ending slides is really good, because one thing that the production director had actually confirmed to us is that each zone that you go through, or hub, has its own distinct set of endings, and that you can really, as they would put it, ruin someone's
Good. I like that.
day. Did I see that play out for myself? No, but when you combine that with the stats they're giving me,
Listen. I'm not saying Good Springs deserved it, but they definitely did every single time.
really excited to see how it pans out. And then when you add on top of that, realistic expectation setting for the world size. The art director told me that Avowed is comparable to something like The Outer Worlds in the terms of its scale, and that more so Avowed was more dense. Now, if it was just the same as The Outer Worlds, I would have my concerns in what content I would stumble upon with exploration, because I feel like that can also be what makes or breaks this game. If you have frequent locations showing up with valuable things to find, that's going to be very exciting. If you have less frequent locations but still valuable things to find, I'll still be happy with it. But if you kind of have what The Outer Worlds did at times, where I'd be like roaming and you just find a pack of enemies by like a bunch of shipping crates, and that's a labeled location and content, I don't know, for me, that's a lot less exciting. That's a
Whoa, bro, literally accidentally attacked all of Fallout.
bit of a bummer, and it doesn't fulfill me as much. So hearing that things are denser than The Outer Worlds is, I think, a good step forward, because hopefully that means we'll find at least frequently more content. And I'm hoping with like the level design that it could be very like Dishonored or Prey-esque, where I can find content X different than you found it, and that'll also be really cool. Cog informed me on this because I did not check this out, but there is actually a glossary option inside Avowed, and I thought this was really good. For those of you who played Pentiment, you'll know that this game had an option where you could kind of pause the game and check out definitions of things that they were referencing, whether it be people or place.
Clara Biddy, Veronica Cat. Oh, jeez, you gotta get accustomed to reading something like this.
Or time periods, that sort of thing. And if you weren't fully educated on the time period, this sort of brought you into the world a little bit more without having to be an expert on it.
What do you mean not educated in the time period? I'm sorry. Are we not? Who is that uneducated not understand middle-aged slang? How dare you, you vixen?
They're taking that same energy and bringing it to Avowed. What this does is enables very lore-centric dialogue to occur, and if you want to keep up, you're gonna have to check this glossary out, but it's gonna be available to you. And I thought this was good because I was thinking about, for me as someone who has yet to play Pillars of Eternity, there's a lot of game there and a lot that could have been left behind. So I'm glad for the hardcore fans who went through this game. It doesn't feel like Obsidian's forgetting about you in the name of accessibility or a larger franchise. I do think the days of Pillars of Eternity are probably done, and that you'll likely get like Avowed 2 more than a Pillars of Eternity 3. I could be wrong, but it just seems like that's the more likely option of the two.
Who knows what's gonna happen? In any case, Avowed. Exciting. And nothing he said seems that bad. Nothing at all, honestly. Anyway, bye. That was Maddie.